Hey, I'm Ed Doyle, president of RealFood Hospitality Strategy and Design, and I'm taking time today to sit down with some of the thought leaders across the spectrum of the hospitality industry to understand where we go from here today. Now, here is a weird place. I'm talking to them all remotely. It's no substitute for being in the same room, but it's no substitute for being in a restaurant together. So we're going to see what comes out of today as we look to the future to redefine our hospitality industry and understand how we can support our clients and, frankly, how we can support each other as we try to get through these challenging times.
My name is Joe Carbonera, and I'm the editorial director for Zumba Group. We are a privately held publishing company in the Chicago area. We publish 2 magazines, Foodservice Equipment and Supplies and Restaurant Development and Design. I am in charge of the overall content strategy for both publications, working with our writers both in print and online. And I also am in charge of our content for our events.
Joe Carbonara, editorial director for Foodservice Equipment and Supplies and Restaurant Development and Design. Thanks for sitting down with me today to talk about where we're going.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
I certainly know that you touch the swath of our industry, almost the way we do, and certainly you're in tight with all of the designers, and you're certainly a diner as well, right? So I think there is part of the conversation of we're fostering moving the hospitality industry forward as people with vested interest in it, but also I want to get out and eat again. So I want to understand how fast we can get to the new normal. And we're certainly in uncharted times for what's impacting the industry. You put on your thinking cap. As we get to the other side of this, what have we learned? What have we learned as part of the hospitality industry?
Well, I think one of the key lessons I think that the industry has learned is I think you have to plan for a rainy day. Other parts of the world have dealt with this sort of thing, specifically in Asia. This is the first time in over 100 years that the United States has really had to deal with something like this on such a widespread basis. We look at early comparisons, I think, for a lot of this had to do with, the terrorist attacks of September 11th or the economic downturn of 2008. But the reality is when you look, or even Katrina in 2005,
right?
September 11th and Katrina really affected regional areas. And after our initial shock, around the whole thing, things slowly started to get better. You look at 2008, while the whole economy as a whole went down, it wasn't so sudden and it wasn't so severe. So there were still industries and still regions that were doing really, really well. We've never seen anything where it's been so severe, so sudden, and everyone's kind of, to use the cliche of the day, everyone's in it together. So I think number one, is we're going to have to learn to plan for a rainy day, keep a little bit more cash on hand, and that sort of thing. I think the second thing that we're going to learn coming out of this is the need to be more flexible, in terms of being able to pivot more quickly and adapt our businesses, even for short term. I think that's going to become imperative for whether you're talking about operators, designers, equipment distributors, manufacturers, doesn't matter. And I've seen some impressive things in terms of the way in specific areas where people have pivoted to kind of keep their business afloat and help the common good.
Yeah, I think the hospitality business is always one that fights the fire that's brightest right in front of them. But we also live a little hand to mouth at times. I mean, the margins are so tight. We are going to need to move into a place where the economics of it fundamentally change as well, I think.
Correct. And it's a balance moving forward. I think that it's okay to be profitable. I'd rather as a consumer, I'd rather some of my business, the businesses that I go to be reasonably profitable so they can withstand this and I can go spend some time there, when this is all over. But we walk through our neighborhood now trying to figure out which one's going to make it, which one isn't. And that's not a great conversation.
Do you see the consumer accepting of potential price increases?
Not in the short term, no. Because their finances have been affected. You look at the fact that 3 million Americans are out of work, and we've seen record high unemployment that's rivaled the Great Depression or maybe beyond. So I think for the short term, I think no. And grocery prices are very, very high. But I think the concept of value, I think, is going to become a little bit more pronounced. And I think there's certain things that they're going to value more when they start being able to dine out again.
That's a really good point. And I think one of the biggest values that we deliver in our world is that hospitality, right? That thing, that non-tangible, that feeling that you get when you have a great dining experience. So we're certainly going to see that transform. Value is one of those key metrics. As we get past COVID, how do you envision those hospitality experiences changing for the consumer?
Hospitality experiences are going to be more important on a personal level to the consumers when they go out. It's something that they've been denied for so long. And I think we've taken, they sort of took it all for granted. We were eating, what was the Restaurant Association say before all this happened? More than half of every consumer's food dollar was being spent on food prepared outside of the home. And I think because we were all so busy, we sort of took some of that for granted. Now it's been denied us for 45 days, or in some cases a little bit longer. So we're starting to realize a little bit of what we had and how important that is to us. So I think, number one, I think it's going to become way more personal. And when things are personal, it becomes, I think it's going to be a little bit more important. And I think too, I think that, we're going to need to be a little bit more detail oriented in the approach. I think that's a really big thing that's going to need to happen or moving forward. Because it's so personal, because it's so important, when I order, a burger or a steak or whatever I'm ordering, and I ask for it just so, I expect that you're going to deliver it just so. And we get into that conversation about, if my money's a little bit tight, but I'm making time for this, I want to know that you care as much as I do. And then now that point there is kind of the gateway into the bigger conversation about overall health. I want to know that you're cleaning and that you're sanitizing and that sort of thing to the level that makes me feel safe to come in there. So I think those are a couple of the key ways that hospitality is going to start to transform itself moving forward.
It's a great point, because I think as the consumer moves beyond the bubble of our homes at some point, hopefully in the near future, we're seeing it happen in some parts of the country, there's a risk associated with that in people's minds. I'm leaving my safe space. So the pressure for that hospitality experience to be great, to be differentiated, to be, quote, worth the risk is going to be a really important consideration of whether I do it again.
I agree. I think that's, is the old cliche, is the juice worth the squeeze? I think really comes into this conversation here, because, I'm going out and I'm going out and putting myself and my family on the line a little bit. And I want to know that you're taking good, that you're taking good care of me. So yeah, I want to know that we're definitely in it together.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. And certainly you mentioned going out to dinner with your family. We do that because we want to embrace the hospitality experience, because we want to connect with people both at the restaurant. We see people supporting their restaurants now because they've realized how important that hospitality experience is. Do you see that hospitality, the definition of hospitality, kind of getting redefined as we move forward? And is there a way to really amp that up through our industry?
In terms of what hospitality, means to me and how that gets redefined moving forward, I think number one, I think it's really going to it's going to speak to the experience. It's going to speak to the quality of the interaction and the food, and it's going to speak to the professionalism of the team that's in place. So the overall experience, I want to know that when I come in, that you value me and that there's some warmth there when you seat me, or even if I'm taking my food to go, that you're able to adapt to whatever those transactions are and make me feel like I'm a valued customer. I think from a quality perspective, my expectation is that the food that I'm getting quality food, and that if I'm eating on premise, for example, that the experience is moving at a reasonable pace, that I'm not waiting forever at my table for my food because you got crushed with delivery orders, and that's backing up the kitchen. You're going to have to be able to balance, I think, that experience to keep customers happy. And I think the last part about it is professionalism. How do you handle that? That we're seeing the care that's on display, that we've been celebrating menu and ingredients for a long time. Now we have to start celebrating the professionalism of how the establishment is run. We've seen some of this, for example, in college food service, where it's not enough for them to serve their students a great plate of food anymore. The social responsibility conversation, how they're dealing with things behind the scenes has become really important. And I think customers are going to want to know that as well. They're going to be able to see the care, if you will.
We've always said that the people in our business are the most important part. But I think the consumer may have lost sight of just how important that is to deliver a differentiated hospitality experience. We've seen consumers stepping up, writing checks to staff support funds, or, I did take out from a good friend of mine that owns a restaurant here in Boston, and she said people are ordering an extraordinary amount of food. far more than she knows they can eat, because she sees, and she asked them why, and she said, because I want to support you and your team, right? So, is there a redefining or re-envisioning of the role of a hospitality worker, not only as its place within society, but within what it's like to work in a restaurant?
I think what we're going to see is you're going to see the amplification of some trends or some developments that were already in place. I think, number one, I think, as the people that work there have always been the brand ambassador. And I think that's going to be even more important. We saw that as open kitchens came on board and people were watching their food get prepared, or when you go down the pick and point line at a fast casual restaurant, a burrito place, for example, and you're saying, I want beans, but I don't want tomatoes, and that sort of thing, and how that person interacted with them really kind of was a key element, I think, of that brand. So I think that the professionalism in terms of how that person acts in their role as a brand ambassador is only going to be more important. And I think it comes into I think it plays into this, the second part of my point. They're going to need to be able to do more, and they're going to need to be more resourceful. And I'm no longer just the guy that makes the coffee. I'm no longer just the barista. I'm no longer just the bartender. I'm no longer just the cook. What we've seen is as staffing models have had to evolve, people who were singularly focused in their tasks have really had to evolve to do more than one thing. And I think we're going to need to see some multi-function players, if you will, within operations moving forward.
Yeah, certainly sanitation is moving up on the consumer's list. They want to know, you need to know as much about the sanitation as you did about where the steak came from. So being able to articulate that is going to be a whole new realm of training for our staff.
It's a conversation that's gone on for a long time. I've joked for the last few years that it's never been a better time, I think, to be a menu writer. All the romancing about how the cow, the lineage of the cow, and how the cow went for long walks in the field and got massages while he watched Jeopardy every day, and that
only had one bad day in its life.
Exactly. And that sort of thing. And I think that's going to transition into operational more now as well. We're going to want to know it. It's funny. Restaurants, I think, have always been really safe. I mean, because if you look at how many people have had to practice, serve safe, the food safety stuff that comes through serve safe, and you have to have, certified food handlers on staff and that sort of thing. And I think that's lost in the general public. And I think that's why it's going to be really important for people to be able to see the care and speak to what's happening in different parts of the business, be able to execute in it, even though it's not the center of what they do. I think that's going to become really, really important, because consumers right now are afraid. There are so much of our conversation about this, at least in the area that I've been, has been very fear driven. So people don't really realize that this has been less of a food safety issue and more of a person to person issue. Yes. So kind of educating them on the fact that, we're cooking our food to a point where no pathogen is able to live. These are the steps we're taking to clean and sanitize. I think there's a lot of positive things that operators are doing. They're just going to have to we've kept it behind the curtain, but we're going to have to bring that out more.
Yeah, the operational element of it is going to be very important. And certainly I know our team looks to your publications as restaurant development and design specifically for such a lens into what's happening in the design world. Where are you seeing a redefinition of the hospitality experience through the lens of design? We're
starting to see more chains develop prototypes that facilitate mobile ordering and to go and that sort of thing. So I think that's a really important, that's something I think we're going to see a lot more of. The other thing we saw before all this happened, and I think it's going to amplify it all the more, is, dining customers coming in one door, and we'll see, third-party delivery drivers and other people going out different doors, coming in and out of different doors, just to kind of keep some of that separation. In part out of safety, in part out of, there's two very different experiences. The people who are eating on premise want one experience. The people who are getting it to go, I think, are going to be it's a very transactional experience that they want. So I think that's really important. I think longer term, you're going to see dining rooms, instead of being like one big space, I think we could end up seeing some smaller, more varied spaces, almost like you see in college food service, where there's different zones, throughout a servery. Can we see something like that promotes more privacy, more social distancing, and that sort of thing, while still creating some type of atmosphere? And I think that sort of speaks to my point earlier about flexibility, about food service operations really needing to become, I think, a little bit more flexible. I think colleges have done a great job with the micro restaurant approach. where they have little certain elements that they can shut down, whether it's for a day part, a day, or even to reconcept. Over time, I think that restaurants are going to need, commercial restaurants, I think, are going to need to get a little bit more modular in the way they're thinking about their spaces.
People that have been able to be, let's call it, somewhat successful in these uncharted times have been the ones that have been able to pivot. So I think it will put additional pressure on the design flexibility, and then also really the thinking about what if, what could be, not going back to what we knew. I think that's going to be the differentiator that sets our industry up for the future. And I think the coolest thing is, like, people like yourself, people like all the other people we're talking to today, there's big conversations happening. These big blue sky, what if, how's it going to be conversations. So I'm sure you and your team, if you sat around, and all the other people that you touch in the work that you do, there's got to be some positives that come out of this. There's got to be some morsel that springs from the floor of the forest after this forest fire that never would have seen the light of day prior to COVID. So what are the big things that you're pondering as something that might be transformative for our industry?
So I think we're going to see renewed focus, for example, on menu, and really kind of questioning, do we need all of that? I know a lot of chains right now are taking a look at looking at their menus and saying, okay, when we reopen, it'll be one menu. Then when we hit the plateau in the middle part of this, we'll go back. It'll be a little bit bigger. But then at some point, we're going to make some long-term changes. And I think that's a really positive thing. So I think relooking at menu, relooking at the experience you want to have, and I think really you want to provide for your customers, I should say, and then really trying to figure out, how you can build some flexibility so in the event that a rainy day happens or a market shifts for some reason, that you can be ready to take advantage of it.
I love your point about thinking about these things differently might be one of the greatest outcomes, because that's where opportunity comes, right? It's when the industry comes together and we collaborate and we think differently.
Part of going into a restaurant, I think we're going to look at restaurant flow differently. We're going to think about some other of those components as well. You go into a restaurant on a Friday night, and the big deal is we're all crowding around the host stand and we're waiting for our turn to come in and that sort of thing. I think that's going to go away. They're going to have to eliminate choke points like that. It used to be exciting to see people 3 deep in the bar, man. You knew that place had buzz. I don't know that we're going to want that anymore. We're going to spread some of that a little bit. So how do we incorporate technology into it? And there's a lot of conversation about technology and how it can alleviate or help in some respects. So we're going to have to pay attention, I think, to those little details and rethink every aspect of what we do.
We always used to talk about defining the touch points as part of a journey map of a guest experience as key points of engagement. Now they've all become key points of liability and concern. So how do we maintain that special part and get rid of the worries around it?
I think there's a couple of unknowns that we need to be aware of that will help shape the industry moving forward. I think the first unknown is, what's government's role going to be in all this? And I'm not talking about restaurant bailout and that sort of thing. That's important, but that's not my point. My point when you look at government is that they like to try and legislate safety and rule and regulate their way to safer environments. So what are some of the restrictions that they're going to impose on restaurants? But in 9 months or a year, when we're past this, what are they going to go back to the drawing board and what are they going to do? Because that's going to really affect how we staff, how we design, how we equip and design, all these spaces. The second thing is, what are the big changes that consumers are going to make as a result of this? When you look throughout our history, when you look through the history of the United States, there's some big things that happen. Like you come out of World War II, for example, and we had Rosie the Riveter making weapons and planes and that sort of thing. And that really kind of paved the way for women to enter the workforce. Now, this isn't necessarily World War II, but it's a pretty big event that's affected the whole country. And I think that's a great comparison. So how are consumers going to change? After the recession of '08, one of the key consumer changes we saw was people wanting to dine on a deal. That really kind of carried, that was still going forward, through this period of growth that we've had the last 7 or 8 years. And the other thing is the concept of blended meals, where I go and I pick up maybe the main course of lasagna or some barbecue or something like that, and I bring it home, right? And that sort of thing. And then I put my own salad and drinks around it. What are consumer changes going to be, in terms of the way they use restaurants? And I think the third and final thing is, what is the corporate mentality going to be? Because when you talk about corporations, for example, if you're a big Vegas casino and you're known for your buffets, well, what's your appetite for risk? We already operate as a country. Our restrictions on buffets and salad bars and that sort of thing was already before all of this.
Far beyond everyone else. Yeah, right.
Way better than what they were doing in Europe. And that's not a knock on Europe. That's just kind of how we are. But what are these companies' appetites for risk going to be? And I think those things are also going to really start to shape the way we look, the way food service operations are designed, they're equipped, how many people come in, the experience you're providing, and that sort of thing. So I think right now, the next 9 months or so are going to be getting back up to speed and getting people comfortable dining out again. But the 9 months after that, I think, is really where we're going to see the fundamental change come.
I could sit and talk to you all day long about this stuff because few things make me more passionate about thinking about getting out in front of this stuff. But I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today and kind of look at our crystal ball. So, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for having me. It's great to be able to talk about some of these things, and kind of gets my mind going in different directions. So we got some more exciting times coming for sure. So thank you.